Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Hospitality Marketing live show number 416. I am your host, Loren Gray, and thank you. And I apologize for those that are watching us live that we had a slight delay in technology and it caused us to false start. And we're just now being able to kick live now as planned, as scheduled. So, for your patience, thank you so very much for waiting for us. And thank you for the emails of like, hey, where's your show? So, thank you. And also now noting that people do truly enjoy it on the TV show, which is really hard for me to conceive since that puts me in a very large screen. And since I'm the only thing on the screen, anyway. So, with that in mind, it is the last show of July. Certainly not our last show. I mean, we've been doing now. Well, next month we'll be into our 10th year of doing this weekly. We'll be going into our 10th year as of August. And as such, we're going to be modifying some of these formatting of the show in the sense that we're going to bring back more guests. We're going to have more guest hosts that might actually lead the conversation as well, instead of having or listening to me the entire time pontificate on certain things, which a little bit of today will be about to a certain degree. Yes, I was going to go in a different direction and I stopped myself. So our topic today is defining good metrics. As with most of the shows, almost all the shows to certain degrees, it's inspired from real life. For those who aren't familiar with what hospitality digital marketing does, as an entity, we're a fix-it person. We're a solution provider. We're the solution that a lot of your agencies or organizations go to quietly to ask questions that they can't get answers to. People that are doing the work that want a higher level capability or perspective, or to help them talk through or work through. Doesn't mean that we're better always than the people that we work with. Just we give a different perspective, and we always present ourselves in a way of an unbiased perspective. A lot of what we do is auditing, both for property acquisitions, market presence, competitive set, analysis of current vendors, on and on and on. I say this only because I want to set the stage for what we're going to talk about today, of defining good metrics. So we put ourselves kind of in those positions where we're the trusted person on your side of the table that can dialogue and understand what is being presented to you with the depth of clarifying the truth to what it is that's being offered from other vendors, services, data, and reporting. Because we're not there to find the niches to replace the server, in the sense that we're always trying to find ways to be the your vendor's not doing this, we could do that, we should be your vendor. We don't do that. Instead, we're the ones that say, this is what your vendor's doing good, this is what your vendor's doing bad, these are things you should be asking about, and then vetting what the vendor is saying and clarifying the relationship that already exists. You pick the vendor for a good reason. You want to make sure that you're getting the most out of them. We help define that communication. We can speak in terms of hospitality. We speak in terms of technology. Again, why I'm bringing all this up? Because defining good metrics has a lot to do with understanding what you're trying to actually measure. The reality of most of these conversations, unfortunately, goes to an unwillingness of one party to admit that they are unfamiliar enough with a topic or topics or content to truly ask questions. What do you mean by? What is that? Without it seeming as if they're naive, ill-informed, or not qualified in the position and role that they're in. That is the bane of productivity and progression, is pride. Sometimes fear, because if you're in a room of your peers and you're supposed to be the authority on something, and a vendor is presenting and people are looking to you to vet what the vendor is saying, and you don't know what the vendor is saying, you can go down a notch in people's eyes if you openly admit it by asking a question like, I don't understand what you're talking about. Now, there's a way of doing it politically, but we're not going to get into the semantics of communication and dialogue and so forth. But just the admission by asking what may appear as a simplistic question is avoided at all costs. I'll figure it out later. I'll find out from somebody else or whatever. That's where we feel a lot of great niches in, because we get to be that person. They get to maintain the integrity of their role, even though that they may not know exactly what's going on, but we clarify it for them. So they can maintain the austerity with their teammates, that they are the resource for answering those types of things. We are that, for those of the old enough, remember the A team. We're the ones that go in and fix stuff and then disappear. Nobody knows who we are, and we only show up when you need me. It's fun. It's a great role. I relish it a lot, in the ability to be that person that can speak truth in the room to both sides. I can call BS on the same side that's fighting a check, because to me, I could walk out the door because they don't like me, but at least I told the truth. So that's how I kind of look at it. And it's a wonderful position. It was wonderful to be called. It is frustrating at times that a lot of times what we do isn't acknowledged. That it's really to solve the solution. As long as we are satisfied with the fact that the person that brought us on board knows that we created a solution, that is thanks enough. But there's always the watching it in the news and go, huh, yeah, we did that, but we can't say we did that. It's tale of two worlds. Going back to all of this, the dialogues that happen and the denials of being able to ask simple questions and get clarity to what's being presented and offered creates a loop. Because once that's done, you can't go back and re-ask the question. You can't go over and say, hey, 2 weeks later, I didn't understand XYZ. And then all of a sudden the person that told you XYZ is going, holy crap, if you didn't understand XYZ, that means you didn't understand anything I was talking about. And now it turns into a huge problem. Think of it, and this is, I'm first person, I'm terrible with names. Think of it as that somebody comes up to you that you've met before, you know you've met before, you remember the conversation you had with the person and so forth. You just don't remember their name. And you're being asked to introduce them to somebody. And you're sitting there going, oh my gosh, I've acted like I've known you for a long time. And of course, we have had our discussions. And I'm talking to you like, of course, we're familiar with each other and so forth, knowing that you don't know their name. And now somebody says, oh, hey, introduce me. Well, who's this? Wow, what do I do? That's the embarrassment you're trying to avoid by not asking simple questions. Rather than getting out to the very beginning, going, I'm sorry, I know what we talked about. I'm terrible with names. What is your name again? And I don't mean any disrespect that you didn't make an impression because I remember what we talked about. I'm just terrible with names. It's not a great solution. Obviously, you want to try memory stuff, and I've tried, it doesn't work, but you still hate those questions. So in this process of defining good metrics, I am privy to being on several conversations, which is why I'm talking about what HDM does. So you understand, I'm not saying this from a what if and how about or third party, or I heard from my brothers, cousins, uncles, nephews, sisters, niece. I'm do this on a first person basis in organizational meetings. I see firsthand the glazed look from somebody that doesn't understand what's being talked about, but they're in the role that they should be knowing what's talking about, or at least they think they should know what's talking about. And they're either too embarrassed or too much in the political scenario not to ask, just like we mentioned. And then I have the vendors who know they're psychobabbling. They just know that they're throwing so many buzzwords together in such a stream of BS that they're purposely trying to dazzle the group into being omnipotently knowledgeable about something or authoritatively aware of what they're talking about to such a degree that they won't be questioned. Because in all honesty, it's a paper tiger. It's on the front. Wow, look at all the stuff you're talking about, synergistic collaboration on dynamic funnel, whatever BS buzzwords that come out of all this. And someone just says, go, pop, explain that to me. Well, if you don't know, no, I don't know. That's why I'm asking you to explain it to me. Tell me what exactly is this? Where did that data exactly come from? What does that number mean? Where did it come from? How did you derive that? What's the formula for how it's done? And I love where then you begin to find that the person that's actually doing the presenting isn't the facilitator of what they're talking about, although they make it sound like they literally created bread. And then you find out that the person that did facilitate it may or may not be with them. So they're going to have to get back with you about the definitions or answers to your question. That's a great question. I hate when people say that. That's a great question. Really, I needed acknowledgement that you agree that I asked a good question. Seriously? That's a stall technique for most people. And it's what's called a positive interjection of a conversational string. I'm not going to tell you that's a stupid question. I'm not going to tell you that's a dumb question. I'm not going to defer unless I'm trying to be that authoritative person who's like, you know what, we'll get back to about that. That means it's not important enough to interrupt what I'm doing to answer your question. You don't do that to the CEO. Everybody's like, oh, the CEO asked a question. Pause. Everybody has to be quiet because when he talks, everybody does be quiet. You ever watch that in groups where this person is so important that they don't worry about interrupting anybody? They just spout whenever they feel like spouting, and everybody else shuts up. And the vendors who's trying to get money from them also shut up. And it's like, really? You're waiting for Muhammad from the mountain here, are you? You're waiting for, the loaves and the fish to come down from, it's like, it's a question from a person that's participating. Yes, they're important in the decision-making process, but it's also good to be accurate and honest with them and not be pensive. Anyways, sorry, that's a political aspect of me. You can imagine me in the meeting rooms, right? So the idea is getting clarity of what exactly is being pitched or discussed or presented or reviewed or analyzed, getting to understanding how the metrics are made to validate why the metrics have value. Now, again, being privy to firsthand conversations like this, I get often presented with what I call cotton candy or smoke mirror metrics. With the changes in UA to GA4 this month, beginning of this month, and you know me, we've been grinding on this topic for a while, both pre-transition and now post-transition. And as we go into budget season for next month, it comes really true to reevaluating and understanding where these numbers are coming from and what do they truly mean and how accurate are they in relationship to what you're relying on them for. If I can never take that as a concept and put that on a plaque on a wall, I would. Because that's the fundamentals of having good data, good metrics, is understanding the source of the data, understanding the math that you're manipulating that data for, the correlations, comparisons, and so forth, and then the usage of that result in the decision-making model. If people understood where their food came from, they'd have more of an appreciation of how to prepare it, so to speak. If people knew where their data come from and what you did to understand that data and create the numbers that you're now relying upon for making financial decisions or any decisions, marketing, personnel, whatever, then you would have a much more engaged, aware team. I can absolutely guarantee you this is such a rarity in C-level or exec level teams as to be almost non-existent. There is always someone that does not admit that they don't know something, but goes with the consensus that somebody must, or it's not my responsibility, or whatever. They don't understand the value of understanding that string of information, data, and metrics and results, that they pontificate on opinions that are then not based on any relevancy of that kind of string of data. Those metrics get artificial. Now, we've talked about the ambiguity of statistics, that presentations are truly made for the benefit of the presenter. We see that. I see that firsthand all the time from vendors, that it's amazing that, and I literally call this out. 1 month, the vendor is pointing to a certain metric, usually a cotton candy metric of, look at all the impressions we're getting. But then the next month, maybe that number is not as positive, or at least not something that's able to be pointed to. It hasn't changed, or maybe it went backwards. And so now all of a sudden it's strangely omitted from the next month report, and a different number is pulled in to reflect something that still makes them look good. It's a shell game. I have very, very rarely ever seen anybody in these meetings when these things are being presented that actually catch that change. For them, these reports are, a meeting about a report about last month. I'm worried about today. I'm worried about this month. But boss says we got to be there. I'm supposed to, I've had this report in my hand when it was gen at the end of the month, so I should be looking at it. They look at it for conversational content only. They don't look at the report to actually make questions, unless it's for them to go over and try to poke holes in. Maybe it's not their report. Maybe it's their political competitor in the C-level space or the exec space, and they want to find things that are incongruous with it or something, and they still miss these things. So you get the vendors doing the shell games where first we're featuring this number, then next month we're not featuring the number, but then we're featuring this number instead of that number because that number makes us. That's the statistics of the reporting, and I see it persistently. Another thing that I see persistently in these meetings is BS number references. I saw one recently in a conversation that was talking about wanting to track how many people went from the website to the booking agent. That is their defining metric on interest of shopping, or I don't know what label they gave to it, but it's a key metric of them. That's a number that they reference to the success of their campaigns and programs. That number goes up, they're doing a better job. That number gets used to go over and define other numbers. Like, well, this number went up 10%. So if we take that 10% growth of this number and apply it to our other efforts, then that means that we had a 10% lift of those. And if these channels generated this much kind of money, then that received a 10% lift also. And they make all these implications. They literally stack the start of not a truthful number to other things and makes everything look like everything's in a positive, constant flow. That's not true. Now, in the case of what I'm giving as an example, tracking traffic to your booking engine from your website, fine. It's a decent metric. Yeah, I mean, it's not a great metric. It's a one of metrics. It's a yes, and tell me what else is doing that. But to give you where this doesn't work as a point of truth, which is a definitive term you apply to certain data sources, points of truth. This data is your point of truth. This is the one in comparison to all other data is related to it, is the one that we say is the point of truth. By making that a point of truth, you're ignoring all the other ways that people can book with you that have something to do with what you're doing, but not directly related to them going through your website. Take case in point, anything that goes to your booking engine directly didn't go through your website, went through to your booking engine, things like meta search and so forth. Those things don't get measured to you in the terms of success. As a matter of fact, they might even get deferred as being something you don't want to mention because it doesn't augment your validation of this traffic from the website to the booking engine as a metric that is definably as a point of truth. Equate it to having a restaurant that has 4 doors that are entrances and you're only counting one door, the front door, but not the other side doors from the parking lot or whatever. Everyone still comes in and dines and eats and so forth, and they come in a variety of doors, but you're only measuring the people walking in this one door as to everything else you're basing your business on. You're missing a lot of other data that could be helpful. So that's not a good metric. It's a metric. It's not a bad metric. It can be used in a logic string when you're trying to correlate the value proposition of what your website is doing. You break it into, okay, this is our total traffic from our website to our booking engine. Let's break that down. Where did the referral sources come from in relationship to our website? Why did they come from there? Did they come from inspiration for ad campaigns, social organics, whatever? And where did they go in relationship to what we wanted them to do versus what they engaged versus where they went to for the booking engine? Ironically, even with this number, you still would like to know what they actually converted. In the case of the conversation that I took this from, they weren't worried about that number. They made an implication number of that. They actually thought that they were pointing out the fact that that number doesn't correlate with this number because that means we would have to account for other sources of revenue that we aren't assigning to this one flow of website to booking engine. So let's just take this number and apply napkin math as to what it means in value. And that's what I'm looking at. Fortunately for me, it wasn't a conversation I had to interject this kind of like, why are you doing this mentality? I was there for a different reason, but I see these types of examples of good metrics being used poorly or poor metrics being used for better intent all the time. The key way to solve these things, other than bringing us on board to ask these questions, which this show is not about pitching what I'm doing, but the idea of the value of questioning them is you questioning those numbers. Why this number? Validate why we need to track this metric and why is it being used as such an instrumental number for everything else you're telling me about what you're doing. Define its value. And you're going to have to know well enough and enough to know that by asking that question, you already know why it's not a good number. The best questions come from already having the answer. Just like the best quizzes or best surveys come from what would I do with the answer? We've had that discussion before. If I had this data, what would I do with it? If that's the case, I should ask about it. How should I ask it to get the most accurate version of the data that I need? It's a backwards way of looking at surveys rather than like, oh, I wonder if everyone likes the color blue. What would you do with the answer? That's the first question you have to answer. Then you create the question that frames it in the way that you get the answer you need to answer what you would do with it. Same too with metrics. What would I do with this number? So taking this as a flat example, I have a number of total people that came to the website versus people went to the booking engine. 1/10 of them, 10% went to the booking engine. What does that number mean? Okay, now the vendor's already exacerbated the idea of what he's using it for, or she's using it for, or they using it for, whatever gender version, that they are assigning the metric value. Okay, because of 10% going to the booking engine, that means that all of our efforts, the monies you give us, we are driving that much business from your website. It went up from 8% the previous month, so we improved what we did. Here's my question. Did it improve the metric that I matter most with? The KPI I'm most interested. What revenue did it improve? If that's the case. First question. How does it translate to my KPIs? The KPIs that we both agree are the ones we measure. Revenue being one of the easier ones to pick out of the hat. From that, how much of an impact? Not just that it generated revenue, because they can imply that, well, if it went up 2% and your total revenue was this, then it should have gone up this. Did that show up in the numbers? They're afraid to ask, number one, because well, those numbers aren't in our spectrum. You guys know that number from your revenue sources. That's you to decide. A butterfly flaps its wings on the other side of the world. A hurricane happens. There is the very high probability that the numbers went up. Sure, traffic went, business went up. It might have been because it's in season. Hey, wake up and look at the revenue management aspects of this. Maybe it's the idea that business went up, and that's why you inherently, as the tide all boats rise, your traffic to the website went up. It's the time of year that people are looking for you, but they're going to refer to it to their efforts. They're going to manipulate, just like statistics, where it's like, hey, because of what we did, this is what happened. So asking those questions of the definition of the value proposition, why did this get defined the way it did? And what data are you using for this? Gives you open the door to say, well, what happens about the meta search that we do? How is that in context to this? Because the meta search doesn't drive to our website, it drives to our booking engine, which means this number does not reflect that traffic. Now, they might say, well, meta search is this and that. We don't focus on it. We don't spend money on it, or whatever. Okay. Okay. Why? Is there a validation to that? Because I'm looking at meta search, and it's a component of percentages of business. And by the way, OTAs, that's their bread and butter. Outside of dominating your destination area and trying to show up better in the SERP pages, they're also dominating in the meta space area, where they're trying to outsell you for your product, even when the people are looking for your product in particular. So if it's successful for them, and they're a multi-billion-dollar company and they spend $1 billion doing it, seems to me we might be considering that we should be considering meta search as well. See, this is where the arguments or the discussions sprout from. A good vendor relationship is always going to be open-ended to the ideas of what they're missing, what they need to listen to, hear the revenue management from the team that's talking about what we need, the numbers we need, the top line KPIs that we need, the trend that we're looking for, whatever it is. The marketing of the vendor isn't to stand in front of you and tell you all the things that they did in a bubble and then blame other entities and other aspects of that didn't come to fruition because, well, we're talking forensically. We're looking at last month. We can't change that back then. And the first question on your mind is, why didn't you know about it far enough farther back that you could have made a change? These lead-on questions and not accepting it at presentation value helps in defining good metrics. Now, with the GA4 conversion and now the usages of the data they're capable from it, leaving it to the whims of your agency or your vendor, there's choices that they had to make that they may not have involved you in. Like, are we doing session-based GA4? Are we doing user-based GA4? Are we doing GA4 as a data layering that allowing for a more distributed analytics or attribution model? If they chose user-based because they feel that first-click attribution is better or last-click attribution is better, they're going to run into trouble with the iOS 17 rolling up now, where it's going to drop it down to 7 days. That's going to kill user-based capabilities. If they're doing on session-based for similarities to what they thought was session-based from UA, which they're not the same, but they think it's collaboratively the same, then they're missing all attribution value propositions related to anything other than the last click. And that means you're going to miss opportunities of channel contribution that the data is there for, but they're not looking at it in the way to acknowledge it. That's not good metrics either. What I'm finding is being very helpful now. And as we build these things and you build them on different variations of requests and so forth, is to first off, solve the issue of transition. What did you used to look at before that you need to see again in some form similar? Like the numbers that made sense to you. By the way, bounce rate, useful number, but not a defining key metric. Because there's so many variations to bounces and what's defined as a bounce and so much more, but vendors seem to have this infatuation with variability on bounce rate. It's a number, and it's a usable number in context of how seeing its value, but defining it as the end all be all is backwards. So if anybody's like, well, our bounce rate, define why bounce is such a critical component. Have them define. And yes, we can talk about it here on the show now. It's more of a understand what bounce rate is actually defined as now with GA4 before you keep listening to them talk about why they're so good at changing your bounce rate. So that being said, the idea of looking at GA4's data source capability of what the transition of what they used to have as data versus what you need as data, especially at a critical point that we're starting with budget season for 2024 here in the next month, is look at how they compare, know where the variations exist and why. This is as simple as asking Google to explain it to you. If your vendor isn't, obviously your vendor should be your first source. You've hired them, you trust them to be doing what they're supposed to be doing. They should be the point of truth for you in defining these things in a way that they make it you understand it. And yes, politics aside, you talk to the vendor so that they are knowing that they have to tell you answers. If you don't have that relationship, you can go look it up yourself and learn more about it. Or you can, well, no, you're not a hospitality marketing person. You can join our hospitality marketing club and ask the same questions as to refining ways and metrics. We have a very lively discussion going on with that right now. So the idea is that's your first value. The second is once that's been established and the reporting is understood by the people that are needing the reports and they're reading it the way that it needs to be read, the next is what can we do next with the data? Now having this expanded capabilities of GA4 data, what other ways can we look at this data? I would venture that one of the next best steps that you can do, and this may not be a now decision, this might be a next month or several months forward decision, definitely by 24 decision, is change the modality of the data that you're tracking. You can do it. You can say, okay, I'm doing session-based data tracking now because of continuity, but now let me go over and look at data layering. Let me look at the variations where I get to see what Google says is my attribution contribution percentages or ratios between all the things that it tracks in its little black box of happiness about how people are engaging with my content and my product. And seeing where your social lands, where your channels land, what is doing what it's supposed to be doing the way Google sees all of the touch things that it had contributed to your conversions. And looking at data not from the event and goal-based perspective that we have been traditionally doing for decades, but now more so into the world of what ifs and how abouts, genies in the bottle questions. Can I determine what days are the better days that people buy King Suites when they're staying 3 to 5 days from their time of booking or within 7 days of their booking window? And yes, you can. You can actually get a nice little grid chart that says this is the density spread by day, by hour, by room type, and by duration of stay and booking. You can create all those axes of data into a chart that says, wow, Mondays between 1 and 1:30, King Suites sell best within 7-day window on a duration of stay of 2 days or more, usually arrivals on Fridays. And some of this might be Captain Obvious stuff, but there's data affirmation. And what does that mean? Okay, it says great. That's a great novelty answer question. Hey, wow, I always never know. I knew Kings were popular. I didn't know where and when, how do they fit into our booking windows and durations of stay and what have you. The next best question is, what do I do with that data? Remember, what would you have with it? You would use the data to know what question to ask. And so here we said the question before we said the answer, but going to what would I do with knowing what room types were popular and with whom and when were they most often booked? What would I do with that data? Well, it means I would probably try to target the people that are buying that inventory to know that if I want to sell other inventory that are in lesser demand, that maybe I change my inventory type rates or promotion time cycle to feature, or maybe in a revenue management perspective, I diminish inventory availability of room types. So that pushes the fact that they're going to be coming because they want to come. They'd prefer King Suite. You got to worry about your denials. Okay. But I really want to push my doubles or regular beds or non-suites or whatever it is that you're trying to push by making it affordably viable for them. And then maybe offer a leveling up of rate that once they booked, it's like, okay, so I know you're looking for a king, which you can determine. We didn't have it available. I won't tell you that I'm the one that limited that. But now they are. Maybe at that point you choked it too much, or you said, you know what, now we're going to go and do it as a value proposition. Like, hey, you were looking for this. We can move you into that room type now. Maybe you can organize with your operations team that you queried a number of king rooms, and you have a list of people that booked into twins that were originally looking for kings, which you can track this data. It's so phenomenal. You can see every inventory room type that's available by rate type, every query that somebody's looking at for rates and availability for you. And you can aggregate that data and come up with answers to questions like that. And now you can say, we're going to make this an incentive value program at front desk that we're going to go over and say, hey, Mr. Gray, you went over and originally looked at a king, or, we have you in a double. Oh, I was really hoping for a king. Well, let me see what I can do when we have. Well, you know what? That's great. Maybe you translate that to an email, or just as a guest reward value. It's like, well, thank you so much, but we can move you into key if you're still interested in doing that. Wow, automatic positive first step experience. There's so many things to do this. I'm not saying this is the right thing to do. I'm making this up as an example of what you can do. There's so many ways to look at data. There's so many aspects of how data is correlated now, and the ways to correlate data, that you can ask better questions. Don't settle for, well, we weathered that transition from UA to GA4. The reports are going to be slightly different, but they're going to be as similar looking as we can make them, so that you don't get confused with the fact that the numbers won't match per se. And now we've opened all these excuse doors for vendors. But the metrics are similar to what you saw before. Granted, that's the first thing we were worried about with most of the transition process, creating a continuity. That should only be a temporary patch. That should be we're past that. Now the next step is redefining what is valuable now with the new capabilities of GA4. And what could we ask now that GA4 is in existence that we couldn't ask before with universal analytics? That we can go backwards in time and look at data, had you done it far enough back to be able to say that you did this, past 14 months, that you look over year data for your budgeting determination for next year, that you can ask some cool questions. And that's the thing we're going to talk about next week's show is, now that we're in GA4, and for all the smart people that did this back over a year ago, they have year-over-year GA4 data. They get to ask a whole new bevy of questions that they didn't get to ask last year with Universal Analytics. They get to go over and say, wow, you know what? I wonder whether or not we undersold our doubles during certain seasonal times, that we just gave them away because everyone was so interested in kings that we too lower rated our doubles. And yet historically we have the demand to show that we had the demand, that we could have probably maintained rate integrity for the doubles equally as well as the kings, that people would still get them. They just didn't want them in preference to the king. And you can go back and look at the data and say, wow, you know what? Yes, we probably could have sold the demand for the doubles in lieu of the demand for the kings. These types of questions, and I am making them up for making the case of the data that you can consider, is very wide and very broad. The idea that nobody cares, and thank goodness it wasn't too much of an inconvenience, and now I understand the variances. I'm looking at the new reports, and thanks for doing that, Bob, for making sure that we didn't falter from all the stuff that Loren talked about of not having GA4 and all this. Yes, that's great. But now it's up to your team, your exec teams, your C-level teams, your organizational corporate teams, to expand their perspective on what they should be asking about to get better answers to what they should make decisions on. That string of, where's the data coming from? What is the math you're applying to the data that produces the results that you're now making decisions on? And asking different questions than have been asked before. That's the value proposition of defining good metrics. All right, I believe I have beaten that to the degree that I was hoping to make my point. Again, apologies for starting a little bit later on the show today. Technology is great when it works. For everyone watching us on TV, thank you so very much for watching on our hospitality channel, the only hospitality channel in the world dedicated to the industry, actually. I get to keep claiming that because uniquely we are in that position, in that role. For watching us on Roku TV, Amazon TV, Apple TV, Google TV, Samsung TV. You can see us on all those. Just look for the hospitality channel. The live show is always on the free side of that pay gateway. On the back side of the pay gateway is a lot of extra cool content, training modules, product display stuff, things that are all industry related. For those of you who are in the business for hospitality marketing, you are more than welcome to join our hospitality marketing club. That's at hospitalitymarketing.club. Put your email in. I send you a quiz, because only people that are actually knowing to do hospitality marketing, we're not there to teach you from zero. There's tons of too many actually, other entities that teach that they say they teach the fundamentals of hospitality marketing, digital marketing. Really, it's just an exposure of terminology. They don't teach you how to do it. They just teach you what's there. But anyways, sorry, that sounds bitter. We don't do that. We're there you're already doing hospitality marketing, you're responsible for hospitality marketing. You need a peer group to be able to collaborate with, kind of like your own Discord kind of thing, or a group of people, Facebook group, whatever way you want to equate it. We're on neither of those platforms. It's our own entity. It's a closed door. I send you a quiz. You have to score 90% or better, which is not hard if you already know them because they're not hard questions. At which point I send you an invite and you join the group, and then you tier up according to your knowledge base and your collaboration and your contribution, and you tier up into your dialogues. It's fun. We're much into this data discussion, relevancy of usabilities and new discoveries of how to track and look at things, and revelations of, you could do this kind of stuff. It's really a fun dialogue, and welcome to anybody that wants to join it for it. There is no charge to it now. I left it at that for the whole rest of this year. It's really about getting and creating a community, and then depending upon how the community feels about it, whether or not we then make it a pay gateway to get in, because some of this stuff is really making people some good money from offering services and generating revenue for their companies. So people are beginning to see that this kind of like-minded community is a high value asset for them. Not a sales pitch, but it ended up being that way. The other, of course, is watching us on simulcast, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. Twitter is now X. Well, it wants to be X, but we'll see. Still call it Twitter because there's no other way to call it. Any which way, you can find us always simulcast on all those multiple channels, multiple pages. We recast this live show for our APAC friends at 11:30 a.m. Wednesdays Sydney time, 11:30 a.m. Wednesdays UK London time. Which will catch our Mideast friends as well. Thank you, everyone, by the way. Interesting email from Kuwait, actually, recently. Thank you. Our TV channel does go to 209 countries broadcast-wise. Our simulcasts go to 39 countries. So you can catch us on all of those as well. And don't forget, we do a audio podcast at the end of this show. That a bit of it is a recap of the show, but we grind into very specific tools and technique usage of those tools to solve particular hospitality marketing functions. That is the Hospitality Marketing Podcast. That also is now going into its 10th year on a weekly basis. It's actually been running for 17 years. I've been doing it. But the past, we'll be into our 10th year. Will be days for weekly. So our podcast and our live show are always weekly. Please join us no matter where we are in the world. We always broadcast. So with that, my name is Loren Gray. I thank you for the privilege of your time, and I look forward to talking to you all next week.